Imagine a country on the verge of economic success, but its dreams are dependent on a huge project: the $5 billion East African crude oil pipeline. Uganda was prepared to use the extensive Indian Ocean network to deliver this undiscovered crude oil to Tanzania. This pipeline promised billions of dollars and an economic boom, but it was more than simply a pipeline. However, the expected Western investment disappeared when Uganda deviated from the course that the West had wanted. Suddenly, hopes were dashed, and the pipeline's future was in jeopardy. Then, in a shocking turn of events, China intervened and offered Uganda assistance, defying Western expectations. However, the tale is more nuanced than a simple deed of kindness. You'll see why the West halted the investment in this video. You will also learn about China's assistance to Uganda. As we reveal the truth and alter your assumptions about China, Uganda, and the West, stay tuned. EACUP, or the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, is a massive project that has been in the works since 2013. The laying of the foundation stone in 2017 marked the beginning of a new era for Tanzania and Uganda, not merely the start of building. Transporting crude oil from Uganda's Tanga and Kingfisher oil fields to Tanzania's port of Tanga, which serves as a gateway to the Indian Ocean, is the primary goal of EACUP. Uganda's oil would then make its way to the international market. China National Offshore Oil Corporation and Total Energies, two significant participants in the oil sector, are involved in this project. With Total Energies owning 65% of the company, Uganda's national oil company 15%, Tanzania 15%, and the China National Offshore Oil Corporation 5%, the stakes are enormous. The project's price has risen to an incredible $5 billion. Unexpectedly, 24 Western institutions pulled out of this endeavor, allowing the Standard Bank and the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China to take their place. The East African Crude Oil Pipeline will be the longest electrically heated crude oil pipeline in the world when it is finished. The Hoima district of Uganda's Busara sub-county is where the 1,410-kilometer EACUP journey starts. It rounds Lake Victoria's southern beaches, travels through Uganda's Rakai district, crosses the Albertine Rift, and ends in the Chongoleani Peninsula near Tanzania's port of Tanga. With a $293 million investment, of which $130 million had already been obtained, Uganda's position in the East African crude oil pipeline was solidified in December 2021, when the Ugandan Parliament approved the East African Crude Oil Pipeline Special Provisions Bill. Tanzania also showed a strong regional partnership by enacting legislation in August 2021. With a $4 billion budget, the East African Crude Oil Pipeline was scheduled to begin construction in August 2016 and be completed in 3 years. In addition to 1,000 to 2,000 permanent jobs, this project was expected to provide roughly 15,000 jobs during construction. Total Energies had committed a substantial $4 billion for the building of EACUP by July 2016. Following high-level talks between Tanzania's and Uganda's oil ministers in Arusha, the 1,443-kilometer pipeline's construction was scheduled to begin in January 2017. However, the budget was reduced to $3.5 billion by August 2017. September 2020 marked a sea change. An agreement between Total Energies and the Ugandan government was inked, paving the way for a final investment decision by the end of the year. It was anticipated that construction will begin in early 2021. Presidents Museveni of Uganda and Suluhu of Tanzania, together with executives from Total Energies and the China National Offshore Oil Corporation, inked important agreements in April 2021. The first oil was anticipated in 2025, and development was set to begin in July 2021. But the overall cost has increased to $5 billion by August 2021. A pipeline is only one aspect of the EACUP. It represents Uganda's economic future, and is anticipated to generate large sums of money from taxes and royalties, which might support growth and the fight against poverty. Additionally, the pipeline is expected to create jobs, especially in rural areas, which might stimulate the economy and promote skill development. It might also contribute to the diversification of Uganda's economy, which is presently reliant on agriculture. The development of the oil industry in Uganda gives the economy a new dimension and lessens reliance on agriculture. Because of this diversification, the economy is more stable and less susceptible to fluctuations in the agriculture market. Another important advantage of the East African crude oil pipeline is energy security. Due to its current reliance on imported oil, Uganda is vulnerable to fluctuations in world prices and supply constraints. This is changed by the pipeline, which allows Uganda to produce its own oil and reduces reliance on imports. Cost reductions and a more reliable energy supply result from this move towards self-reliance. In order to guarantee a consistent domestic oil supply, the ECUP also contains plans for an oil refinery in Uganda. An important step in achieving national self-sufficiency is this newfound energy autonomy. Additionally, the pipeline improves Tanzania-Uganda regional collaboration. These countries, which are bound by the establishment and functioning of ECUP, are expected to strengthen their bonds by expanding trade, infrastructure development, and security cooperation. Greater economic integration and regional prosperity could result from this collaboration. Prior to discussing China's role in rescuing the pipeline, it is important to comprehend how the West first got involved with the project before pulling out. At first, Western countries including the United States, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom showed a great deal of interest in the East African crude oil pipeline. These nations pledged financial assistance in the form of grants and loans. For instance, the French Development Agency provided a $325 million loan to support ECUP's growth. Western nations pledged to reduce financial risks by offering insurance and guarantees. Political risk insurance was provided by the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency of the World Bank. Eventually, the Western nations withdrew their funding for the project. The specifics of this withdrawal and its ramifications show a convoluted story of commitments made and then broken, which had a big impact on the project's course. At first, Western nations were determined to provide their experience to the East African crude oil pipeline project. For instance, in order to reduce the project's adverse effects, the UK government committed to providing Uganda with technical assistance that would concentrate on social and environmental protections. The possibility of discovering additional oil deposits in Uganda sparked the West's early interest in funding ECUP. Western countries seeking to diversify their energy sources and lessen their dependency on Middle Eastern oil found this appealing. It was believed that having access to these new deposits would improve their stability and energy security. But as time went on, their original zeal and pledge of support for ECUP changed, and they eventually withdrew their pledges. Examining the reasons for their early curiosity, as well as the elements that ultimately caused them to withdraw, is necessary to comprehend this shift. The goal of the East African crude oil pipeline project was to promote Tanzanian and Ugandan economies. It was anticipated that the pipeline's construction and operation would boost employment, government revenue, and investment, all of which would contribute to the region's economic growth. However, Western nations' actions eclipsed this promise. At first, the initiative attracted attention from countries including France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. However, these nations suddenly stopped providing financial assistance for the pipeline after a time of encouragement and the dissemination of positive signals. This action was taken in the midst of extensive pipeline propaganda. The effects of ECUP on the environment were a large portion of the Western propaganda. The pipeline's path across delicate ecosystems sparked worries about habitat destruction, deforestation, and disturbance of wildlife. Environmentalists said that because of greenhouse gas emissions from transportation and oil production, the project could jeopardize endangered species, damage biodiversity, and accelerate climate change. Social concerns were also voiced by Western nations, particularly over the uprooting of villages along the pipeline's path. These social and environmental issues, however, were also perceived as a component of a larger plan to halt investment and stop Uganda from building the pipeline on its own. Under the influence of the West, international environmental organizations targeted the oil pipeline in an attempt to obstruct its completion and so deny Uganda the potential benefits. In addition to social and environmental concerns, Western nations questioned the feasibility of ECUP due to financial risks such as unstable oil prices, cost overruns, and political unpredictability. This position sparked accusations of hypocrisy. Western interventions started out as ostensibly environmental, but they later withdrew their support despite the pipeline's potential to enhance Ugandans' quality of life. Their decision to stop providing financial support combined concerns about the environment, society, and finances, frequently exaggerating the drawbacks and downplaying the advantages. Furthermore, the presence of pipelines in Western countries without comparable objections from these groups implied that African projects were being singled out. This discrepancy suggested that these groups might be used to sabotage African advancements, while comparable Western initiatives went unchallenged, exposing a double standard in environmental campaigning. In the East African crude oil pipeline project, China has become a key investor after Western funders pulled out due to environmental concerns. More than half of the $3 billion in loans required to build the pipeline has been pledged by Chinese lenders. The Export-Import Bank of China and the China Export and Credit Insurance Corporation are in talks, according to Uganda's Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development. A large amount of the pipeline is being financed by Exim Bank in partnership with Sinosure, a Chinese state-owned export credit insurance company. Uganda is seeking investment from the Islamic Development Bank in Saudi Arabia, as well as many African institutions, such as the African Export-Import Bank, in addition to Chinese lenders. Even after some Western banks stopped lending money, Uganda looked for other alliances. The partners recently announced a final investment decision of $10 billion for the project, which includes the construction of the pipeline to carry crude oil from Hoima in western Uganda, as well as the development of the oil field. The Kingfisher oil field on the eastern banks of Lake Albert in Uganda is managed by the China National Offshore Oil Corporation. It is anticipated that this field will produce 40,000 barrels per day at its peak. The larger Telenga oil field, run by Total Energies, is expected to produce about 190,000 barrels per day and is estimated to have cost between $4 billion and $6 billion to build. In January and June of 2023, respectively, the well development and drilling for Kingfisher and Telenga got underway. A major turning point in the landlocked East African nation's economic development. These developments put it on track to become an oil exporting nation by 2025. For the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, ECUP, Standard Bank of South Africa and the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China are acting as primary debt arrangers and financial advisors. An organization that keeps tabs on banks and their financing operations, Banktrack, released a report on this trend. Furthermore, Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corporation of Japan first refused to fund the project, and it is still unclear whether it would continue to act as a debt arranger and advisor. Last year, the European Parliament also took notice of the ECUP project. Citing concerns for human rights and the environment, lawmakers voted a resolution demanding that the project be stopped. As global concern about the pipeline's possible effects grew, this resolution also cautioned Total Energies against getting involved in the project. The conflicting positions of Western nations are brought to light by the European Parliament's resistance to the East African crude oil pipeline. They first offered insurance against political risk before halting investing due to environmental concerns. In response to Western pressure to scrap its oil aspirations, Uganda promoted a balanced energy transition that combined renewable energy projects with gas and oil. Uganda's forceful moves, such as dismissing the US ambassador and ceasing cooperation with the European Union over human rights penalties, are thought to have prompted the decision to halt investment. Relations were further strained by Uganda's military collaboration with Russia, which was seen as a break from Western allies. A shift towards stronger connections with China and Russia is shown by Uganda's criticism of Western hypocrisy and neocolonialism in international fora, such as President Yoweri Museveni's speech to the UN General Assembly. The West is thought to have withdrawn from the ECUP initiative as a result of this change and Uganda's increasing assertiveness. With China filling the void left by Western nations pulling out of support due to human rights and environmental concerns, Uganda's shift to new alliances raises serious concerns about the direction of African economic growth and international relations. Do you believe that Uganda's newfound connections will create a more wealthy and equitable future, or will they exacerbate divisions around the world? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. We explore the rich history, culture, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty in Africa. Join us in this important conversation by subscribing to our channel. By subscribing, you're not just staying informed, you're becoming part of a movement dedicated to reclaiming Africa's rightful place on the global stage. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Let's work together to spread knowledge and inspire change. Thanks for watching.